Okay, here we go. Okay, hi Caelainn. Thanks for agreeing to do this. I actually really hope it works out well, and if it doesn't, we can just delete these videos and never speak of it again. Um, but I there's a few people that I'm really interested in, like their take and their understanding and their thoughts around like what is going on in Ireland at the moment, and also like where does that fit in the whole world scheme of things. So that's a really big topic, I think. Like where's our culture, where was it, where is it going, and it's one that I'm confident you will be able to talk about, because I barely can, even though I'm a writer. I was a comedian until the pandemic ended comedy. If you think about it, comedy, it's like the perfect spreading ground. You're sitting inside. Everyone has to be close to each other. That's a big part. Like the community of comedy is really important, and you're laughing, which is like germs, right? Anyway, so I did comedy. That's like a smaller part of who I am now. Mainly, I write and I study and I read. Um, and I live this experience of being an Irish person, right, who isn't in Ireland. I'm in the US, I'm in New York. I just got back here a few weeks ago. I managed to inveigle my way past the travel ban, and I made it back in time for a tropical tornado that happened here yesterday. So, anyway, let's start with some questions. Like, I suppose I'd love to talk to you about, let's talk about our names, because I sometimes I call you Caelainn, and then other times I call you Caelainn, and people call me, Mad, Maid. One person called me Star. I don't know where that came from. I think it was because I was spelling my name, and I said it's like Steve but Maeve, and so they said Star. Um, but look, we're two people born in Ireland who have Irish women names. Let's start there. What do you think about your name? What's the history of it? And then I might tell you about mine. Okay.
Hello from Dublin, Maeve, thousands of miles away. I feel like we're doing video diaries, which is fun. Um, Definitely understand the struggle with an Irish name. My name, Caelan, is spelled in a way that I think people around the world, having reported around the world as a journalist, have struggled with the pronunciation. But also here at home, Irish speakers often give out to me because it's not spelled according to the rules. It's not Cael agus Cael, Lahan agus Lahan. So I get that as well. It means slender and fair, and definitely living up to the pale part. So curious to hear about your own name and your thoughts about it. Uh, it's I think in Ireland right now, I mean, we've been doing okay during the crisis. It's obviously been very difficult. I remember during lockdown, someone said that the official status of Ireland changed from "it'll be grand" to "all right, fair enough." So, and I think that's where the community has really come out, and that whole idea of mind yourself and look after each other. So but having just written a book about the religious run institutions in Ireland and their ongoing legacy, it's very worrying and sad to see that institutional systems are sort of still in play here, and we're seeing people in direct provision, people in emergency accommodation, low paid workers, migrant workers in meat factories being really affected now and very vulnerable during this pandemic because of those sort of institutional conditions. So I think this pandemic is exposing inequalities that have been there, and but in a new way. I think people are recognizing the need for change. I'm really curious to hear about your own experience traveling from Ireland to New York, where you've been living, and getting around the travel ban and the experience of being an Irish person in New York right now as an immigrant, as someone who's not American, at a time when a monumental election is coming up, and there are these crackdowns on protests, and it seems like a really monumental moment. So what has it been like being an Irish person there, and also looking at Ireland from the US? I think our relations have been somewhat strained or complicated recently. The US and Britain have taken quite an exceptionalist approach to dealing with this crisis, and Ireland has always been very good at soft power, and we've just gotten our seat on the Security Council, which will be based in New York. And there's an Irishman leading the COVID response with the WHO. So how are Irish people being viewed? I know there's a lot of emphasis on the Irish American vote, but how is Ireland viewed from the US at this time? And we've obviously have a new government now, and we went through a pretty seismic election ourselves. And there's all this talk about a green recovery. And you've done so much reporting and research into climate justice and climate change. I think there was a lot of worries and division about whether this green recovery will really mean justice and will address those inequalities that are being exposed by the pandemic. So curious to hear your thoughts on that, because I think it's an international movement for this, for climate justice, but a lot of countries are promising a green recovery at the moment, and I think there's a lot of uncertainty about how successful that will be. So looking forward to getting your thoughts on all of this.
I just looked at your message there while I'm waiting. It is, oh my God, there's so much to talk about. I'm gonna reply properly this evening, but for now, I'm sorry that Irish speakers give you a hard time about your name. I think I don't spell mine correctly either. It should be like MEDB or something. Okay, talk soon. Okay, I'm back. I'm inside. The weather has been crazy here. It's so interesting that you talk about, climate change, because New York is now classed as a subtropical place, like weather-wise. I know weather's not the same as climate, but so boiling this morning, and now this afternoon we're supposed to get like another tropical storm. So there was a tornado last week, and there's tropical storms this week. If I'm out, I'll get you some on tape. But it's so telling that like the new breakouts at home in Ireland have been in the meat processing plants and in the direct provision centres. Like it's the same here. It's like social injustice leads to actual like death and disease. Like it's very serious. And I think it's the same with climate justice, right? Which is like something I've learned about from Mary Robinson in our podcast. And it's basically like where human rights and climate change intersect. And basically I've learned that they're all linked. Like racial justice is climate justice, is economic justice. And so again, like with, as you mentioned, like the institutional powers that are still in control of some parts of Ireland. Like, let's talk about direct provision. I'm wearing my like little end direct provision t-shirt today, but this government said they were going to end direct provision, and I don't see that that's happening. And now the people stuck there's like 7,000 people, I think, in DP have got higher rates of COVID than the population who are not held in these institutions. And it's the same here in the US. Like, I'm sorry, but Ireland does love to think that it's so much better than America, but our treatment of asylum seekers is really not great. And like I said, it's telling that it's in these meat processing plants, and it's in these institutions that house asylum seekers. That's exactly the same as here. It's in detention centres here, and it's in meat processing plants here, the viruses, So I don't know, let's talk about it. Like, I do want to talk more about climate justice, but like, what about us? Like, what can we do as we're in this rarefied space, right? We get to write, and we have these platforms, and you and I will get to talk on Culture Night. And, I wear this t-shirt and I kind of like hope for the best, but like, what do you think what agency do we have, and what power do we have, and what responsibility do we have as kind of these people who make culture or use language? Because as we know, language helps to shape perceptions and thoughts, and vice versa. So, how do we best use that? There's a big question for you. Okay, I can't wait to talk to you. If I'm out later on in the rain and get some, I'll send it to you. Bye bye. And as promised, here is the rain, the lightning. There's going to be thunder soon.
Hi Maeve, so this is the Balsiskin Reception Centre. It's very near the airport, off a main road. You'll be able to hear the cars whizzing past. And it's often where people seeking international protection are brought first. It's a direct provision centre, one of the biggest in Ireland. I first wrote about this centre and visited it during 2013. And so it's been operating for so many years and really not much has changed. So this is the gate here. And as you can see, it's right on a main road. It's really isolated, and for people first coming here, they first described it as a camp, and I was really confused by that at first, thinking they meant a refugee camp somewhere on their way, but that's how they describe the direct provision centres. Hi Maeve, I'm just on the bus. I think we should pass it over to Bulelani Mfaco, who's from Massey, the Movement of Asylum Seekers in Ireland, and maybe he can give us some insights into the reality within the system.
The name is Bulelani Mfaco, and I'm one of the spokespersons for the Movement of Asylum Seekers in Ireland. The group was founded back in 2014 by asylum seekers in a direct provision centre in Cork. The purpose of the group was to campaign for an end to the system of direct provision against the deportation regime and to campaign for the right to work for asylum seekers. Back in 2014, asylum seekers were not allowed to work at all, so people were waiting for about 5 to 10 years in the direct provision system without the right to work. Now you can imagine trying to raise children on an allowance of what used to be €19.10 without the right to work and no knowledge of when you will be out of that limbo. So the group was founded to campaign for essentially a more humane asylum system. The Irish government today has committed to ending direct provision system and replacing it with a more humane asylum reception system, but we don't know what that looks like, and so campaigning does not stop for us. We will keep campaigning until the very last direct provision centre is closed, but we'll also be campaigning for a tribunal to investigate breaches of fundamental human rights in direct provision. It's well documented both domestically and internationally and condemned by the United Nations in various committees of the UN, and so we know from our own lived experiences that direct provision system has undermined the right to dignity, for instance, but also the right to privacy for asylum seekers who have had to spend as many as 10 years having to share bedrooms with 10 other people in some instances. And so we'll be campaigning for an investigation into the direct provision system, which has only served to enrich the operators of direct provision centres. And so we campaign for justice, we'll campaign for dignity, we'll campaign for freedom for asylum seekers. And we ask that you join us in that campaign, so you can subscribe to our updates on the website www.massey.ie. We'll also be getting updates on the various campaigns that we run. You can also come and volunteer for one of the activities that we do. Regularly, we will post about meetings once the pandemic, of course, is over. When we're organizing, we do post our events on social media platforms, and so you can come in and join us in the campaign. A lot of the work that we do is dependent on support from members of the public who aren't in direct provision, because you can imagine it might be difficult for some asylum seekers in direct provision to even get involved in campaigning, people trying to survive under very difficult circumstances. And so we ask that you join us in the campaign to end the system of direct provision and to ensure that Ireland has a more humane asylum system that complies with all the general human rights norms.
Hi Maeve, I'm out here by the sea with the pool bag towers in the background, and after just hearing Bulelani talk about the realities of direct provision and the experiences of people seeking asylum in Ireland, I wanted to come back to your own experience of travelling back to New York with the travel ban, and the reality, the experience of being an Irish person, an Irish immigrant in New York at the moment. I remember while I was living there was always a lot of pressure on being the Irish person and sort of, drinking the most and being the most crack.
So I don't know if you feel that pressure. I know that you've written about sort of small talk and the inability of Americans to make small talk, but I think during the pandemic Irish people have really depended on it, you know, the sort of unpredictability of the crisis, when lockdown's going to end, if you wear a mask, and that's sort of how we've coped with the unpredictability of this crisis. But, you know, in the US, I know there's been a big crackdown on immigration, on travel, on people seeking refuge, and Irish people hold quite a sort of unique position and a unique privilege in a way in the States, even though there's many people who are, I'm sure, worried about their status. There's people who've been living there, you know, without undocumented for years and decades, who consider the US their home, but, you know, are worried that any time they could be deported. So yeah, what's it like there at the moment as an Irish person in the US, and what are your sort of thoughts for the future in New York?
Hey, thank you so much for getting that insight into direct provision. It was really cool to understand like how to support people that are living there, and also take direction from them on the best thing that we can do as citizens. It's interesting, like being here at a time when there are more people on the move, right, around the world than any time since World War II. And here in the US, like refugee numbers are at an all-time low. That is like people being accepted here. And of course, being Irish, we know in our hour of need, we were welcomed. After this, I'm going to show you this really amazing kind of monument to the Irish famine that's right here on Manhattan Isle. So yeah, I mean, being Irish here at the moment, it is certainly, there's the Irish Americans who are in power right now, like people like Mike Pence, who talks incessantly about his granddad who was from Mayo. So I definitely have the kind of like, oh, I want to show another side to Ireland than that. But it's cool to be able to be here and contribute to the culture, and to understand too that, you know, culture changes and it's growing all the time, and even the way we speak English changes, and the words we use, and the way we write. And I think, you know, so many writers and artists kind of left Ireland, or maybe had to leave Ireland, and it gives you a clarity about where you're from, and it also changes you, and it changes the place you land in. And as I'm talking about that, I'm thinking about people like, you know, Joyce and Beckett, but also me, right? Like, I wonder what ways I've changed, if I'm making any impact on American culture at all. It's too early to tell, I suppose, but I do think that, you know, when you think about things like the migration crisis or the refugee crisis, you actually lose out on all of the huge benefits of, you know, mixing up your population. And I don't mean that in like a gross way of like, they're young and they can pay tax and we're an aging population in Ireland. I just genuinely mean like people lending their humanness to another country, and how valuable that is. And I think that migration is a human right. So I'm trying to figure out where I come down on borders. And of course, things like capital doesn't have borders. We make it very easy to move money around. But also art and music and writing doesn't have borders either. So can we use that? You know, can we use that? So this is the famine memorial, and it's sort of beautiful and bleak and appropriate, although there is a workout class going on right next to it. People have to be outside now.
I think it's so true what you say about culture changing and how quickly we've seen it change, in some ways at least, sort of cultural norms or a culture of shame and stigma in Ireland that's really changed over the last few years, with the breaking of silences and people telling their stories. When I was in New York, actually, I remember that people from the LGBT community still weren't allowed to march openly in the big New York St. Patrick's Day parade. And even I think this year there was some issues with Staten Island parade, and one of the women who was meant to lead it coming out and not being allowed to march. So it's strange the distance between the culture that Irish Americans feel that they're upholding and the culture here in Ireland that, you know, has changed really rapidly, or I think maybe has just opened up, you know, that we're beginning to trust each other in new ways. And I'm going to show you in the next video the last Magdalen laundry that closed in Ireland, and I've spent the last few years working on the book, speaking to so many survivors of the religious run institutions, and you know, them speaking up about their experiences has really been a catalyst for change and made us more aware of, I think, the harms of our culture in the past, but also is building this new and more inclusive culture in Ireland. And so I guess to wrap it up, I think I wanted to ask you, what is the biggest change that you've seen in Ireland over the last few years, and or maybe what change do you think is to come or is necessary? So it'd be great to get your thoughts on that. So Maeve, this is the Magdalen laundry on Sean McDermott Street, the back of it. You can see the fan there. And this laundry closed in 1996. I always think of it, it was the same year that the Spice Girls put out their song Wannabe, and everyone was talking about girl power. So the building is still here, and I've just been speaking with a woman who was sent here when she was only 13 and worked in this laundry. I think important to remember this part of our history.
Unbelievable. That building is so spooky, and I can't believe 1996. Like you said, it's how recent this history is. It's in no way behind us, so it's really important to, I suppose, understand it as much as we can, and know that it already informs us whether or not we understand it. And you know, it's true what you said as well about, yes, the St. Patrick's Day parade here did not allow gay people to march under their own banners, and you know, there's a lot of that, like we talked about Mike Pence and the kind of conservatism that's on the rise here in large parts of Irish America. I say conservatism, you know, there's also fascistic tendencies that, you know, are growing here, and I'm sure that Irish Americans in government are playing a part in that. So it's serious, it's real stuff, you know, but I would say also in the St. Patrick's Day parade, it's an interesting little microcosm, because it was, you know, civil rights lawyers, you know, Irish American civil rights lawyers that helped to overturn that, right? Terry McGovern is this amazing lawyer who was, you know, really active in AIDS legislation back then and worked on the campaign too. And then people like Daniel Drum, who's proudly Irish American, and he's a councilman now up in Queens for many years, and a really outspoken, active member of the LGBTQ, you know, community. And that's the thing, like immigrants and our descendants, like we're not this homogenous, you know, kind of like, you know, this kind of static ethnic identity. What happens when you leave and you move somewhere new is that you take on multiple identities, right? And I think those can be influenced by all these cultural and societal factors. And the cool thing is that, like, the immigrants, we also influence the culture that we land into, which I think we're seeing both ways now, you know, with immigrants coming to Ireland and immigrants leaving, like we have been. So, yeah, I mean, it's been really cool to talk to you, and it's been really, like, powerful learning more about the history that's still, you know, history that still, like, has such a powerful effect on us, you know. And Caelainn, I know you're really careful not to draw direct lines or force parallels that aren't there, but it's been cool to discuss direct provision with you in light of all of your research about other ways that the state has, you know, incarcerated people. So yeah, I'm glad of the work that you do of, you know, telling stories. In your case, you know, true reported journalistic stories. In my case, I do a bit of that, and I also make stuff up. So I think that I'm grateful for storytellers, I'm grateful for artists. I have this cool Linda Barry quote that I wanted to say, I wanted to get it right. And this is more for people who like fictionalize their stuff, because I think that can be, I'll tell you what she says. She says, we don't create a fantasy world to escape reality. We create it to be able to stay. So thanks to all the artists out there. I know it's not easy at the moment, but if you're a storyteller, if you're an artist, if you're a singer, however you express yourself and tell the stories of you and others, I think that we really need it. And it really bolsters me day to day. So, yeah, sending lots of love, Caelainn. Thank you for doing this project with me. It's been really fun. I feel like I'm still going to send you some videos from time to time, even if it's not Culture Night. Okay, bye.